When Richard Donovan's private jet landed quietly on the long stretch of his estate's private airstrip, it was not expected. The sun was still high above the trees in suburban Georgia, casting long shadows over the sprawling 20-acre property. The staff had no prior notice. No security protocol was activated, no red carpet laid out, no fancy suitcases rolled onto the marble floor. The master of the house had simply returned unannounced. Richard, in his late 40s, was a billionaire. With a firm jawline, silver hair that added to his intimidating aura, and a sharp suit that never creased. For the past 4 months, he had been in Europe, managing mergers, attending events, dining with CEOs, and making headlines. He had left behind his 9-year-old daughter, Grace, in the care of the household staff. With the usual instructions, keep her healthy, safe, and busy. He had not expected the noise, the laughter, the splashing, the carefree giggles echoing from the backyard when he stepped through the main doors of his mansion. It caught him off guard. His leather shoes clicked across the cold marble floor as he followed the sound, past the formal dining room, past the glass wine cellar, and finally, to the full-length windows that overlooked the infinity pool. His eyes, narrowed there in the crystal-clear water, was Grace. She wore a bright yellow swimsuit, her golden hair slicked back, her arms cutting through the water with clumsy joy. But she wasn't alone. Beside her, laughing, kicking, spinning, was a woman, black, young, smiling, wearing a one-piece blue swimsuit. Richard's jaw stiffened. It was the maid, or more specifically his maid Zora. He didn't move for a few seconds, just stood there, stunned. A billionaire father, returning from business-class clouds, only to see a scene he couldn't quite process. The help swimming with his child, in his pool. Zora didn't see him yet. She was too busy showing Grace how to float on her back. Relax, girl. Let the water hold you, like I showed you good. That's it. Grace squealed in delight. Richard pushed the glass door open. It made a distinct click. The laughter stopped. Grace turned first. Daddy. She screamed, scrambling out of the pool like a seal, dripping water everywhere, and ran toward him barefoot. He bent down out of instinct, catching her midair. Her arms locked around his neck, her small, wet body soaking his tailored shirt. But his eyes never left Zora. Zora stood waist-deep in the pool, suddenly aware of her body, her wet skin, the cold gaze fixed on her. She took a breath and slowly walked toward the edge of the pool, pulling herself out with practiced grace. She reached for a towel, wrapped it tightly around her body, and stood tall. Eyes met his butt only briefly. I didn't expect you. Home so soon, Mr. Donovan, she said quietly. Richard didn't answer. He carried Grace in his arms, her hair dripping onto his shoulder. She was talking a mile a minute about how Zora had taught her how to swim, how she wasn't scared of the deep end anymore. They played underwater tag and had fruit juice, and it was the best day ever. He nodded absent-mindedly. But inside, a storm was brewing. After handing Grace off to her nanny for a warm bath, Richard called Zora to the study. She came, still damp-haired but composed, now in jeans and a plain white tea-shirt. He didn't offer her a seat. What exactly do you think you were doing? He asked, voice low. Zora folded her hands in front of her. Teaching Grace how to swim, sir, she asked. She's been asking for weeks. The instructor you hired never came. I didn't think you didn't think, he interrupted sharply. Exactly. You're not here to play. You're not her friend. You're her maid. Zora's eyes flashed briefly with something anger. Dignity. But she said nothing. I don't want to see you in the pool again, he said. Understood. She turned to leave, he added. And if Grace asks for something again that's outside your role, you come to me. Is that clear? Yes. Mr. Donovan. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Richard let out a long sigh and sank into his chair. He wasn't racist, he told himself. He had black employees. He donated to charities. He'd even won an award for corporate diversity. Last year, but something about what he'd seen unsettled him. Not because Zora was black, but because she had crossed a line. He had built his empire by enforcing boundaries, structure, hierarchy, and she had broken that. But over the next few days, Richard began to notice things, small things. Grace refused to eat unless Zora served her. She didn't want the nanny to read bedtime stories. She snuck into the kitchen when Zora was baking and licked the frosting bowls. She clung to Zora like a vine. Richard watched from afar, uneasy. Zora had been hired a year ago through an agency. She was in her 20s, quiet, but warm. Her references were glowing. Former employers described her as dependable, honest, caring, but Richard had never paid much attention. She was background, one of many, part of the polished machine that kept his mansion humming. Now she was center stage, and Grace adored her. One evening, Richard asked Grace why. Because she listens. Grace said simply. I listen to, Richard offered. Grace shook her head. You always talk about business, or say you're busy or gone? Zora listens, and she hugs me when I cry. Richard felt something pinch inside. He didn't know what. To say the days turned into weeks. One morning, Richard found himself in the kitchen, pouring his own coffee, a rarity. Zora was at the counter chopping strawberries. She greeted him politely without stopping her work. Do you swim often? He asked suddenly. She looked up, surprised by the question. Not really. I used to, when I was little. My mom taught me. Richard nodded, pretending to care more about the coffee than her answer. She was a maid too, Zora continued, unasked. I used to go with her to the houses she cleaned. Rich folks. They had pools we weren't allowed near. One day she said, if they won't teach you, I will. So she did. In a hotel pool, taught me everything. Richard looked at her again, this time really looked. She was calm, proud, strong. There was no shame in her voice. He didn't say much else that day. But his mind kept returning to her words. Over the next few weeks, the frost began to thaw. Slowly, he started coming home early, sitting at the dinner table, listening more. He noticed that Zora never overstepped again, never went near the pool. But she was still a part of Grace's world more than he had ever been. One rainy evening, Grace fell ill. Fever, shivers, vomiting. The nanny panicked. The doctor was called, but it was Zora who sat by the bed all night, wiping Grace's forehead, singing lullabies softly in the dark. Richard stood in the doorway watching. He didn't stop her. At dawn, as Grace finally slept, he walked Zora to the kitchen and made tea. She accepted it silently. I overreacted, he said quietly. About the pool. Zora looked at him for a long moment. It wasn't about the pool, Mr. Donovan. No, he admitted. It wasn't. I know my place here, she said. But Grace doesn't need just staff. She needs presence. You can't outsource love. It struck a nerve. For the next few days, he sat with Grace longer, read her stories, took her on walks. She clung to his hand like she used to when she was younger, and he realized how much he had missed. One afternoon, as he returned from a board call, he saw Grace by the pool again. She was trying to float alone. Her arms flailed. She panicked and cried out. He sprinted before he could even dive in. Zora was already in the water, fully clothed. Pulling Grace up, she coughed, sputtered, and Credand hugged Zora like a lifeline. Richard froze. Zora climbed out with Grace in her arms, soaked shoes ruined. She didn't apologize this time. Told her not to go near the deep end alone, Zora said, catching her breath. Richard didn't yell. He didn't frown. He just took Grace in his arms, held her tight, and looked at Zora with something different in his eyes. Respect. I'll have your clothes cleaned, he said awkwardly. Zora smiled faintly. Thanks, but I'm fine. No, she was. In the months that followed, Richard changed. So did his house. He still flew to Europe, still closed million-dollar deals, but he was home more often, present, aware. Zora stayed on. Not as a maid. He promoted her officially as Grace's caretaker, tutor, guide, people whispered. Some disapproved. Some raised eyebrows at the idea of a billionaire letting a black woman once his maid become such an integral part of his daughter's life. But he didn't care. He had returned home expecting silence. Control, order. Instead, he found love inspected. Unfiltered and honest in the form of laughter by a pool, and it changed everything.